She vanished without a word. What he discovered after was a soul-crushing masterpiece of revenge. You won't believe what this woman did after finding lipstick on her husband's neck. What starts as a quiet anniversary morning turns into the most breathtaking escape you'll ever hear. The soft morning sunlight poured through the blinds as I shifted under the covers, stretching my arm across the cool sheets. My hand landed on empty space. Josh's side of the bed was cold. I furrowed my brow. Guess he left early, I murmured, glancing at my phone. It was 6:58 a.m. I smiled and reached for the tray I'd set up last night. His favorites: thick buttermilk pancakes, a handful of blueberries, and a cup of black coffee. Just how he liked it. Today was supposed to be our 10th wedding anniversary. Nothing fancy planned, just meaningful. I thought we'd take a walk through the local nature preserve where we first ran into each other, then swing by that old indie bookstore where he asked me to marry him. But as the minutes crawled into hours, my smile faded into something colder, something uncertain. No calls, no texts, just silence. By lunchtime, the pancakes had gone soggy, the coffee untouched. I sat at the kitchen counter alone, my hair, once styled just right, now twisted back in a messy knot. I tapped my phone screen again and again, like I could will a message into existence. But nothing popped up. Every time I heard a car out front, I glanced toward the door, but Josh never walked in. A quiet pressure settled in my chest. I couldn't explain it, not yet, but it was there. Maybe he's surprising me with something, I said out loud, trying to calm the uneasy feeling building in my gut. But doubt crept in anyway, slipping through the cracks like a chill draft. I sent him a message. Where'd you go? Happy anniversary, babe. Still nothing. The air in the house felt heavy. It used to feel warm, full of light and inside jokes. Now it just felt still. I looked at the breakfast tray and let out a shaky laugh that broke halfway through. Maybe he just lost track of time. Maybe he was napping at his brother's or something. But deep down, I felt it. I just didn't want to admit it yet. This day wasn't going to unfold the way I imagined. By the time I stopped pretending everything was fine, the sun was already high in the sky. My fingers shook as I picked up my phone and hit his contact. It rang once, twice, then straight to voicemail. My heart started racing. Hey, it's me, I said softly, trying not to let my voice crack. Just call me when you get a chance, okay? I wandered through the living room, still in my robe, unsure what to do next. The cold hardwood floor beneath my bare feet clashed with the heat building in my chest. I tried calling him again. This time, there was no ring, no voicemail, just empty silence. My mind started spiraling. Maybe he got into an accident. Maybe he left his phone in the car. Or maybe not. The pit forming in my stomach told me this wasn't something that simple. I scrolled through our messages, searching for anything, some clue, a reason, but all I found was the stale, hollow silence of being forgotten. Then, a soft ping broke through my fog of panic. Remember what I said at the beginning? Yeah, this is where everything changes, and it only gets more intense from here. A message popped up on my screen, from Cecilia. Saw Josh at Tandoori Lounge. Looked like he was having a great time. Didn't know you guys were celebrating early. My entire body froze. The air left my lungs like I'd been sucker punched. I just stared at her text, my chest rising and falling like waves crashing against rocks during a storm. My hands trembled as I typed. Who was he with? The reply didn't come fast enough. My eyes blurred with tears I refused to let fall. I whispered bitterly. So it wasn't an accident. You just didn't come home. I collapsed onto the couch, hugging my arms around myself as my breath came in sharp, uneven bursts. The truth was slithering its way into every corner of my mind, tightening like a noose. What was supposed to be a beautiful morning had turned into a cruel performance, and I was the only one still acting like it mattered. It wasn't until 12:37 p.m. that Josh finally walked through the front door, sunglasses on, keys jingling in his hand, whistling like everything was fine. But the moment he saw me sitting at the dining table, completely still, his step faltered. Oh, hey babe, he said way too casually. Didn't expect you to be home this early. I didn't answer. I just looked at him, my gaze sharp, unreadable. Where were you last night? I asked, my voice low and steady. I wasn't yelling, but the stillness in my tone made it clear. This wasn't small talk. He hesitated, scratching the back of his neck. I went out with some of the guys. You know, we watched the game. Lost track of time. I stood up slowly and walked toward him. Then, I reached out and ran my finger along his neck, where the faint red smear of lipstick bloomed like a wound. My finger paused. "Josh," I whispered, "you smell like Chanel No. 5. And just like that, the tension snapped like a frayed wire. He stepped back, awkward and guilty, probably from one of the girls at the bar. Everyone was hugging goodbye. It wasn't. I cut him off with a bitter laugh. "You're a terrible liar. You always have been." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Come on, don't blow this out of proportion," he said, his voice rising. "It was just one night. It didn't mean anything." My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. "You don't even remember what today is." He opened his mouth, then closed it. The realization hit him like a delayed punch. I nodded slowly. "That's right. 10 years, Josh. 10 years." And I woke up alone. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. I walked right past him without a word. The smell of deception lingered in the air, heavier than any cologne. That night, the dinner table was set out of routine. 2 plates. His, steak, medium rare. Mine, baked salmon, perfectly done, just how I always made it. Candlelight flickered between us, throwing shaky shadows across the silence. I pushed my fork around my plate, not touching a bite. My eyes were fixed on the clink of Josh's knife against his plate. He chewed slowly, like nothing was wrong. I couldn't wrap my head around it. How could he just sit across from me like this, as if he hadn't torn something apart, and expect us to keep going? "Did you have a good night?" I asked suddenly, my voice flat, almost mechanical. Josh blinked, caught off guard. "What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? That I regret it? Either way, you wouldn't believe me." I let out a soft smile, but it never reached my eyes. "You're right," I said quietly. "I wouldn't." In my head, the table blurred into flashes of old memories. Our laughs, glasses clinking with red wine, gold-wrapped anniversary gifts exchanged with full hearts. Now, the only thing wrapped around me was the lie I was slowly unraveling. I looked across at his face, this man I once memorized like a favorite song. Now, he was just a stranger in skin I used to know by heart. "Do you still love me, Josh?" I asked, not because I needed to hear it, but because I had to measure just how far we'd fallen. He looked up, unreadable. "Of course I do. We're just going through a rough patch." His jaw tightened. His knuckles whitened around the silverware. "This isn't a rough patch," I said quietly. "This is a crack down the center of everything we built." He sighed, frustrated. "So what now? You want to throw away a decade over one mistake?" I didn't say a word. I just stood, picked up my untouched plate, and walked it over to the sink. Behind me, the silence screamed everything I wasn't ready to say. Not yet. The engine of my car was still warm when I pulled into the lot outside Aria's apartment. My heels echoed on the pavement as I made my way to her door. She opened it almost immediately, like she'd been waiting. One glance at my pale face and swollen eyes, and she didn't need to ask. "He did, didn't he?" Aria said bluntly. I didn't answer. I just walked in, dropped my purse on the couch, and stood in the middle of the room like I didn't know what to do with myself. Aria let out a quiet sigh and closed the door behind me. "Come sit," she said gently, guiding me toward the sofa. "Tell me everything." I took a shaky breath. "He was gone all night," I said slowly. "Then he came home, acting like it was nothing. Lipstick, perfume, lies." Aria's jaw clenched. "You're not seriously going to sit here and pretend this didn't happen, right?" I stared down at my hands. I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. I thought if I stayed quiet, maybe it'd all fix itself. But silence feels louder than being deceived. Aria stood and started pacing. "You've already forgiven too much. You kept shrinking just to fit into his idea of love, and he paid you back with shame." My throat tightened, and I blinked fast, trying not to cry. I honestly thought maybe I was enough for him. She dropped to her knees in front of me and took my hands in hers. "You're more than enough. You're a whole damn universe, Emma. Don't you dare forget that." A heavy silence settled between us, broken only by the quiet sound of my breath hitching as I finally let out a soft sob. "So now what?" I whispered. Aria's voice was calm but firm. "Now, you think for yourself. No guilt. No apologies. Just you." For the first time in days, something stirred inside me. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't hopelessness. It was clarity, determination. A little past midnight, Josh lay asleep next to me, his back turned like nothing ever happened. I stayed still for a long time, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. Once I was sure he was fully out, I slipped quietly out of bed and tiptoed over to the dresser where he usually plugged in his phone. My hands were trembling as I picked it up. He'd never changed the passcode. 4 digits. Our wedding date. I nearly laughed at the irony. The screen lit up to a fresh message thread. Last night was unforgettable, Red Heart. My stomach twisted. I tapped the thread open, and there it was. Photos, a short video, voice notes that made me feel sick to my core. Laughing. Whispered secrets. Plans to meet again. I scrolled through it all until I physically couldn't anymore. This wasn't a slip-up. This wasn't a mistake. This was a full-blown deception. Carefully nurtured, deliberately hidden, and fully lived out. I backed out of the chat, heart racing, and opened his email. Plane tickets, too. Dinner reservations under a fake name. Hotel confirmations. Nothing about this was spontaneous. While I was folding his laundry and baking his favorite lemon cake, he was planning a getaway with someone else. I gripped the phone tightly, standing in the pale blue hallway light, feeling like I was watching myself drown in slow motion. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to shake him awake and demand the truth. But instead, I placed the phone down gently. I walked into the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and stood there with shaking hands. He doesn't deserve me, I whispered into the stillness. And for the first time, the silence agreed with me. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was sad, but because my mind had already begun walking through every door I'd never had the courage to open until now. 2 days later, I stood in front of my closet, staring blankly at rows of dresses. None of them felt right. Too cheerful. Too fake. Eventually, I chose a soft blue one and slipped it on, painting on a smile that felt foreign on my face. Cecilia's baby shower was being held at the Willow Garden Room, one of those dreamy venues with pastel balloons and mason jars full of peonies. Everyone was glowing, hugging, laughing. I smiled. I nodded. I said thank you when people told me how great I looked. But inside, I felt like glass. When Cecilia hugged me, I froze for a split second. You okay? She whispered in my ear. You seem off, Cecilia said gently. I forced a smile. Just tired. You know how anniversaries can be. Cecilia, unaware of the storm happening under my skin, let out a soft laugh. You and Josh are always the perfect couple. The word hit like a shard of glass. Perfect. If only they knew. I moved from group to group, sipping orange juice while everyone else enjoyed champagne, faking smiles that never touched my eyes. One woman gushed about her husband surprising her with a trip to Maui. Another shared how her partner teared up during their baby's first ultrasound. I stared down at my hands and drifted away. The whole room felt like a gallery of the life I once thought I'd have. When Cecilia asked me to help unwrap gifts, I politely declined. I just need to get some air, I said, grabbing my purse. Outside, I leaned against the cool wall and inhaled the crisp breeze like it was the first breath I'd taken in days. My phone buzzed. A text from Josh. Where are you? Can you grab detergent? I looked at the screen, lips curling into a bitter smile. No, how are you? No apology, just detergent. That was my worth to him now. I powered off my phone and never went back inside. I sat in my parked car outside our house, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel. My eyes stayed locked on the front door, but my thoughts drifted far beyond it. Something inside me clicked, a kind of detachment that didn't come from anger, but from clarity. I didn't care to confront Josh anymore. Words would spin in circles, and I had no interest in begging for the basic decency I deserved all along. Honesty. That night, after Josh left to meet the guys for drinks, I sat at the dining table with my laptop open. The blank Google search bar blinked at me. I typed, real estate agents near me. My heart didn't pound, and my hands didn't shake. I felt calm. I listed the house under discrete interest, flagged for potential sale. Then I opened a second tab, one-way flights to Portugal. I closed the laptop right before Josh walked back in. He reeked of whiskey and someone else's perfume, but I didn't even flinch. You're still up? He asked, kicking off his shoes. Couldn't sleep, I said without looking up from the book I wasn't reading. When he kissed me on the cheek out of habit, I didn't react. My body had already started leaving, even if my feet hadn't moved yet. That weekend, while he watched a game with a beer in hand, I messaged my childhood friend in Lisbon, the one who had begged me to visit for years, thinking about taking a break. Can we talk? She responded within a minute. Always. I've got room if you need it. I smiled faintly, a flicker of warmth in a hollow chest. The plan was in motion, and not even Josh's indifference could stop it. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't throw anything. I would simply vanish, quietly, like early morning fog when the sun rises. By Monday, I began packing, quietly, methodically. One box at a time. I started with the things he wouldn't notice: off-season clothes, old books, a framed photo of my dad that Josh had never noticed had moved. I stacked the boxes neatly in the back of the closet, each labeled with vague tags: storage, donations, miscellaneous. Josh barely noticed. He came and went, absorbed in work, sports, and his secret life, blind to the subtle void opening inside our home. I never rushed. I moved like a woman tidying up after a funeral. No tears, no noise, just reverence for what had already died. With every item folded, every drawer emptied, I whispered silently, "This is for every time you lied. Every time I believed you." At night, I still made dinner like always. We still sat at the same table, exchanged the same empty small talk. But I no longer lingered on him. My mind was on rental contracts and embassy appointments. One afternoon, I pulled my mom's property deed from the file cabinet and arranged to lease it through a local agency. It would serve as passive income abroad, enough to support me while I figured out my next steps. When Josh asked about my missing jewelry box, I told him it was out for polishing. He barely blinked. I even sent myself random packages to create a sense of clutter. It was almost poetic. The man who never paid attention couldn't see what was slipping through his fingers. As I stared at our half-packed living room, I thought to myself, one more week. Just a few more days, and I'll be gone. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid. The only question left was how to leave without a single goodbye. The cafe was tucked away in a quiet part of town. I'd only been there once before. I wore dark sunglasses, my curls tucked under a scarf, and gave a false name. When I sat across from the woman who unknowingly helped steal my place, she smiled too widely and said, "You must be Brianna. Josh said you'd help me with the event planning." I nodded. "That's right. He mentioned you two were close." The girl, young, polished, and clueless, laughed like a schoolgirl. "Oh, more than close. We're basically inseparable now. He's just so different with me, you know?" I stirred my coffee slowly, my spoon tapping the edge of the ceramic cup. "Different how?" I asked, my tone flat. She leaned in, conspiratorial. "He's gentle. He says I make him feel alive again." I smiled, a thin line. "And his wife?" I asked, pretending to be curious. She waved her hand. "Oh, that's over. He says she's cold and distant, that they don't even sleep in the same bed anymore." I swallowed hard, the taste in my mouth turning sour. "And the house?" I asked. "You see yourself living there?" Her eyes sparkled. "I've already picked out paint colors for the guest room. Can you imagine?" I didn't blink. I stood up, nodded, and said quietly, "Thanks for your time." I didn't look back as I walked out. Outside, my lungs expanded like I'd been holding my breath for years. That girl had no idea, and neither did Josh. But soon, they would. I wasn't broken anymore. I was becoming dangerous. At 2:47 a.m., the digital clock on the nightstand blinked silently. I hadn't slept. I lay on my side, motionless, listening to the soft rhythm of Josh's snoring. The room was cloaked in shadows. The only light came from the blue glow of a street lamp slipping through the curtains. My eyes stayed on the ceiling, but my mind was far from still. My heart was exhausted, but my thoughts raced. Bits of laughter that once meant everything now echoed with deceit. I turned toward him, studying the shape of his jaw, the faint scar near his brow from that hiking trip years ago. I used to trace it with my finger as he whispered promises in the dark. Now all I felt was detachment. I was lying next to a stranger wearing my husband's face. Slowly, I leaned in, my voice barely a whisper. "Oh, you have no idea what you've lost." The words floated into the night, unheard. I held back the tears, not from pain anymore, but grief. Grieving the version of myself who waited for him, who stayed loyal through lonely weekends and cold dinners, who thought love was about patience and that hurt was part of the deal. That woman was slowly dying beside a man who wouldn't even realize it until I was already gone. I slipped out of bed and padded barefoot to the kitchen. The silence there echoed louder than ever, like a cathedral of loss. I stood by the sink, arms wrapped around myself, whispering again, this time with conviction, "You don't deserve me anymore." And for the first time, I believed it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I started my goodbye, not with words, but with the final, quiet resolve of a woman who had stopped hoping to be loved the way she deserved. My phone buzzed on the counter just after lunch, flashing a message from the real estate agent. "Offer accepted. Final documents signed. Funds will be wired this week." I looked at the screen, then gently set the phone down, both palms resting on the counter. It was done. The house, my house, was no longer mine. The walls that once held laughter, arguments, our marriage, all sold off like discounted furniture. I didn't feel regret, just closure. Later that day, I met with my attorney to finalize the legal transfer back into my maiden name. Josh hadn't noticed the bank account shifting or that the deed had quietly disappeared from our shared files. That's the thing about people who never look too closely. They don't realize what's gone until it's too late. That night, while Josh sat on the couch watching a basketball game, I walked past him with the passport folder tucked under my coat. "I'm heading out for a bit," I said casually. "Need anything?" He waved without looking. "Maybe some chips. Hit the store if you pass one." I smiled faintly. "Sure." Outside, I let out a long breath and drove to the Visa Service Center. I submitted the final paperwork and booked my fingerprint appointment for the following week. Destination: Lisbon. Quiet, simple, and far enough that Josh would never find me unless I allowed it. When I got back an hour later, he was passed out on the couch, an empty beer bottle resting on his chest. I walked right past him like he was just another piece of furniture. Upstairs, I sat beside the window bathed in moonlight and sent a message to my friend overseas. This time, I'm serious. The email came in just after midnight. Subject line: Mayor for life. My heart skipped a beat at the nickname. Only one person ever called me that. Joshua, the guy with the quick grin and too much heart, who once swore he'd marry me if Josh ever ruined things. We hadn't spoken in years, not because of a falling out, just life pulling us in different directions. I opened the message with trembling fingers. "Cecilia mentioned you're thinking about Lisbon. If that's true, I want you to know you won't be alone here. I've got space. I've got time, and I've still got your favorite coffee waiting." A laugh slipped from my lips, catching me off guard. It was small, but real. I typed my reply slowly, choosing every word carefully. "I'm coming. I don't know what happens after, but I'm finally ready to start over. Thank you, Joshua." His response came almost instantly. "I never forgot you. I just respected your silence. I'll be there when you land." I closed the laptop and sat in the stillness, my chest lighter than it had been in weeks. Joshua wasn't just an old friend. He was a mirror of who I used to be before marriage twisted me into someone else. And now, with everything crumbling behind me, the thought of seeing a face untouched by deception felt like peace. I walked to the closet and pulled out a small leather bag I hadn't touched in years. I began filling it with essentials, not like someone fleeing, but like someone finally stepping forward. Lisbon wasn't just an escape. It was a return to myself. It was the kind of Sunday that used to mean slow breakfast and fresh flowers on the table, but Josh had his own rhythm now. He fluffed pillows on the couch and sprayed cologne around the living room like that alone could mask the dust of deception. "You think you'll like it here?" he said, watching through the window as she arrived. The door opened, and Casey walked in like she already belonged there. "Oh wow, it's exactly how you described it," she said, twirling lightly in the entryway, heels clicking on hardwood. "So this is where the magic happens." Josh chuckled, but his smile was tight, uncertain. "Something like that," he replied. Casey dropped her overnight bag beside the stairs without asking where it should go. She kissed him softly and asked, "Will this place ever feel like mine?" He paused before answering, unsure why the question bothered him. "Eventually," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. She moved through the house like it was a showroom, humming to herself as if redecorating in her mind. He watched her closely. She was young, lively, the opposite of Mary's quiet grace. But when Casey laughed from the bedroom, something flickered inside him. The silence in the house had changed. It wasn't empty, it was hollow. Casey turned to him. "Are you still thinking about her?" He hesitated. "We haven't really talked," she lied. She smiled, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Good. I don't like sharing." He nodded, kissing her, but his eyes drifted beyond her, down the hallway where Mary used to leave him handwritten notes every morning. There were none now. Just a bare wall and the hum of a woman playing house in someone else's place. Mary returned earlier than planned, slipping through the door just as dusk wrapped the neighborhood in its quiet glow. The silence welcomed her like an old friend. Josh was in the kitchen, startled by the sound of the door. "You're back?" he asked, closing the fridge. "You didn't say when." She set down her bag, her voice steady. "Thought I'd surprise you." That night, she cooked, not because she wanted to, but because it was the kind of gesture he would remember if he ever developed the capacity to feel guilt. She made oxtail stew and mashed yams his favorites. When she set the table, Josh looked surprised. "What's the occasion?" he asked. "Nothing special," I said, taking a seat across from him. "Just thought we could share a meal for old time's sake." We ate slowly. The clinking of silverware was louder than our words. After a while, I leaned back and asked, "Do you love her?" His fork stopped in midair. "Mary, it's a question, not a trap," I interrupted gently. He looked down. "I don't know. It's different." I nodded. "Different doesn't mean better." He sighed. "You've been distant too, you know." My eyebrow lifted. "So that's your excuse?" "I cooked for you. I stayed loyal. I waited. And because I stayed silent, you took that as permission to break me." He turned away, shame darkening his features. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "But you did." After washing the dishes, I went upstairs without another word, leaving him to stew in the silence he had earned. That would be the last dinner we ever shared. He just didn't know it yet. The next morning came quietly. Birds chirped outside, and the kettle whistled on the stove. I moved with purpose. My suitcase was zipped. The closets were stripped of anything that had ever made them mine. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't sad, but because my tears had run dry weeks ago. Before leaving, I wrote 2 letters. One was for Rosa, our housekeeper, and I left it carefully on the counter. The other, addressed to Josh, was tucked beneath the glass fruit bowl where I knew Rosa would find it once the house fell back into its usual rhythm. I looked at the walls one last time, breathing in the scent of a home that no longer belonged to me. My fingers grazed the arm of the sofa where so many late-night conversations once bloomed. "Goodbye," I whispered. "You won't hear from me again." As I stepped out, the sun broke through the clouds like curtains rising on a new stage. Rosa arrived just as I rolled my suitcase down the path. "You heading to your sister's?" she asked, squinting. I paused. "Something like that," I answered softly. I handed her a key and motioned toward the kitchen. "There's a letter for him. Don't give it to him until I'm gone." Not a moment before. Rosa hesitated, confused, but nodded. "Okay." I offered a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "It will be." I got into the taxi and never looked back. As the car pulled away, the house shrank in the rearview mirror like the last page of a chapter finally turned. What Josh woke up to was emptiness. What I stepped into was freedom. Josh stretched and smiled sleepily, expecting the smell of coffee or the sound of my footsteps humming through the hallway. But the house was still. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Mary," he called out lazily. No answer. He wandered into the kitchen expecting a note, maybe breakfast. Instead, there was nothing. Half the dishes were gone. The fridge was nearly empty. No eggs, no milk, not even his favorite yogurt. Confused, he moved through the house. The bedroom closet echoed strangely. My clothes, my scarves, even the picture frame beside my side of the bed were gone. His fingers hovered over the empty space like he'd been burned. "No, she didn't," he muttered, rushing downstairs. On the kitchen counter sat a sealed envelope with his name on it. He opened it with trembling hands, unfolding it like a man bracing for a storm. "Josh, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I didn't want to fight, and I didn't need a goodbye. I wanted freedom, and now I have it. I watched you walk away from us one night. Today, I walk away from you forever. Not with anger, but with peace. Don't try to find me." His knees buckled slightly as he leaned on the counter. His heart raced, panic spreading like fire through his chest. He grabbed his phone and dialed my number. Disconnected. He opened our joint banking app. My name was gone. He checked the deed transferred. His breath came in short, ragged bursts as the weight of my absence sank in. He hadn't been left. He had been erased. And that was far worse than any slammed door. Josh burst into Aria's apartment like a man possessed, his voice cracking as he demanded, "Where is she?" Aria didn't flinch. She sipped her tea with crossed legs, her expression unreadable. "Good morning to you too, Josh." His voice rose. "I know she talks to you. Tell me where she went." Aria finally stood, locking eyes with him with icy calm. "I don't know where she is. And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. You don't deserve her trail." He looked stunned, like he'd been deceived. "I'm her husband," he barked. "Exactly," Aria said coldly. "You were her husband. You don't get to panic now that you've finally woken up." He opened his mouth, but the words died there. He had no defense, only regret. He tried Cecilia next. His voice was softer, almost mournful when he called. "She didn't say much," Cecilia told him quietly. "Just that she was tired." He asked if she knew where Mary had gone. "Someplace better," was all she said. Even Mary's mother, once polite despite the tension, slammed the door in his face before he could say a word. "She should have left you years ago," she hissed. "Be grateful she did it with grace." Josh backed away from every doorstep like a man scraping off pieces of himself with every stare. He came home to echoes, not a home. Casey had gone away for the weekend. He had asked for space, though he hadn't known why. He collapsed onto the couch and stared at the ceiling, the silence heavy and suffocating. Everyone around Mary had known she'd leave one day. He was the only one stupid enough to think she never would. Casey returned Monday morning, humming as she stepped through the door, a small suitcase in one hand and an iced coffee in the other. "I brought almond milk this time," she said cheerfully. "Thought we could try it with pancakes." Josh was sitting in the living room, eyes empty, body still. She leaned down and kissed his cheek. "Are you okay? You look like you haven't slept." He didn't respond. Casey walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and frowned. Mary had wiped the place clean. Josh finally spoke. His voice was flat. "She sold it." Casey froze. "Wait, what?" He looked at her. "She sold the house. I don't own it anymore." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean? You don't own it?" He stood slowly. "I mean she took back everything that was hers, this house, my share, all of it." Casey let out a sharp laugh, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, maybe this is a good thing. We can start fresh, build something together. That's what you wanted, right?" Josh looked at her, but didn't see the woman he thought he was choosing. Her voice, her perfume, even her laugh felt like an invasion. He brushed past her and opened the cabinet where Mary used to keep chamomile tea, now empty. "We can buy new things," Casey said, trying to stay upbeat. "Paint the walls, get a new bed, make it ours." He turned around slowly, his eyes tired. "You think new paint is going to fix this?" She narrowed her eyes. "You're still thinking about her, aren't you?" He didn't answer because in that moment, it became painfully clear that Casey had been a decision made in a daze. Mary had been his home, and now all he had left was a house filled with someone else's voice. The walls seemed to close in tighter with every passing hour. Josh's days bled into nights, and sleep no longer came easy, even when his eyes were shut. Mary haunted him, her quiet grace, the way she'd set her tea down with a soft clink, the way she'd gently touch his shoulder during the weather forecast without saying a word. Now, those tiny gestures echoed louder than all their arguments ever had. One night, sitting alone in the kitchen, he opened a drawer out of habit, the one where she kept scented candles and neatly folded linen napkins. It was empty, like everything else she'd left behind. His hand trembled as he gripped the counter, trying to stay upright. "What did I do?" he whispered out loud, barely keeping it together. The kitchen light flickered as if in reply, and suddenly he sank to the floor, sobbing loud, guttural cries that filled the empty house. There was no one left to hear him, no hand to comfort him, only the low hum of a refrigerator that didn't care. The pain wasn't just about losing Mary. It was about the version of himself he had abandoned, the husband who used to rush home just to see her smile, the man who forgot what loyalty meant while chasing something shinier. Casey called him a few times that night, but he ignored them all. He didn't want her voice. He didn't want anyone's. For the first time, the weight of his deception truly settled in, not his guilt, but his devastation. He hadn't just lost Mary. He had shattered her. And in doing so, he had broken something sacred in himself. Desperation drove Josh to the immigration office the next morning. He wore his only clean button-up shirt and carried a folder with Mary's old travel records. The woman behind the glass looked completely unfazed as he leaned in and said, "My wife's missing. I need to know if she left the country." She barely glanced up. "You'll need a police report, and even then we don't release travel logs without a court order." He swallowed hard. "I'm not trying to hurt her. I just need to know where she went." She blinked slowly. "Sir, if she left willingly, that's not our concern." The words hit harder than he expected. He stepped out of the building feeling like someone had slammed a door right into his chest. On the way home, he called a private investigator. "I need you to find someone," was all he said. 3 days passed. Then came the call. "She's out of the country," the investigator confirmed. "Lisbon. Name's no longer connected to yours. Mail redirected to a law firm. That's all we could find." Josh sat on the edge of the bed with the phone pressed to his ear. "That's it?" he asked numbly. "That's everything you've got?" The man paused. "That's all she left behind. Whatever she planned well." When the line went dead, Josh stared at the floor, completely still. She'd really done it. She left the country, erased her trail, cut every tie. He was clinging to shadows. She hadn't just walked away, she had stepped entirely out of his world, out of his reach, out of his control. And the terrifying part was realizing she hadn't done it out of anger. She'd done it with purpose. And purpose was far more permanent than rage. Josh spent hours that night flipping through old photo albums, something he hadn't done in years. The images documented every season of their life: birthdays, anniversaries, quiet vacations, lazy Sundays, and matching pajamas. There she was, smiling at him across time. But the more he looked, the more he noticed her eyes, never fully lit up, not the way he thought they had been. He picked up a photo from their trip to the waterfall resort. They looked happy, draped in matching towels. But when he really studied it, Mary's hand didn't rest in his. It hovered, just slightly apart. That photo stayed in his mind more than any other. That tiny hesitation in her fingers, the space between them, invisible but wide. She had already been slipping away. Even then, he whispered. He walked over to the shelf where Mary kept her journals. Most were gone. Only one remained, tucked between two cookbooks. He hesitated before opening it, unsure if he had the right, but curiosity won over guilt. Inside were dated entries, short reflections in her tidy, firm handwriting. Today, he forgot the soup I spent hours on. Didn't notice the haircut either. Jay, I wonder if silence is safer than truth. And then one that buckled his knees. If I ever leave, it won't be because I hate him. It'll be because I finally remembered how to love myself. He clutched the journal to his chest, his breathing uneven. Mary had never screamed, never cursed. But here, in quiet ink, she'd left behind a thunderous truth. He had never really seen her, and now she was gone because someone else would. A light drizzle tapped against the window as Mary sipped her espresso at a quiet cafe tucked into a narrow street in Lisbon. She looked different now, more at ease, more peaceful. Her curls framed her face naturally, and she wore no makeup. Across from her sat Joshua, older than she remembered, but with the same warm eyes. You haven't changed, he said with a soft smile. Mary chuckled, stirring her drink. That's a lie, and we both know it. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. All right, maybe you've changed, but in the best ways. You look free. She tilted her head slightly. That's because I am. They sat quietly for a moment, letting the hum of the city move around them. He finally broke the silence. Is it too soon to ask what happened? Mary hesitated, her fingers tightening slightly around her cup. He forgot who I was, and that's when I remembered. Joshua nodded, understanding without needing all the details. You don't owe me the story, he said gently. Just the truth about who you are now. I exhaled slowly. I'm healing. It's strange. Some mornings I wake up and still expect to hear him brushing his teeth, and then I remember, I'm free. Joshua's eyes softened. So what will you do with that freedom? I gave a faint smile. I think I'll build something new from scratch this time. He reached across the table and placed his hand gently over mine. Then let me help. There was no romantic pressure in his voice, just the quiet sincerity of a man who once loved me silently and never stopped caring. My eyes blinked fast, caught off guard by the emotion rising in my throat. You were always the safe place, Josh, I whispered. He gave my hand a soft squeeze. Then let me be the beginning. That night, we sat on a stone bench by the river, watching the lights from passing boats shimmer across the water. Joshua turned toward me, the breeze lifting his collar. I said it before, he began. I want to help you rebuild. I've got an opening at my firm, Community Consulting, flexible hours. It's not flashy, but it's yours if you want it. My eyebrows lifted. You'd really do that for me? He nodded. I'm not offering this out of pity. I know who you are, Maria. I know what you've survived. That kind of strength deserves a seat at the table. I looked away for a second, the weight of being offered something with no strings pulling at my chest. I don't even know who I am anymore, I murmured. Then this is the perfect place to find out, he said. I went quiet, watching a little ferry move in the distance. Back home, I felt invisible, even to myself. I don't want to be that woman again. Joshua's voice was soft. Then don't. Be whoever you want to be now. You don't owe your old life another single day. I turned toward him, something swelling in my chest I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Okay. I said at last, my voice steady. I'll take the job. His smile came instantly, youthful, bright. Then welcome aboard, Maria. We both laughed, the sound unfamiliar but comforting. I didn't know what the future would bring, but in that moment, it didn't matter. I had work to do, not for a man, not for a marriage, but for myself. And that made all the difference. Back at the house, Casey stood in the middle of the bedroom with her arms crossed, watching Josh dress in silence. He hadn't said more than a handful of words to her all week. She had tried everything, soft gestures, cooking his favorite meals, lighting candles, even wearing the silk robe he once complimented. Nothing worked. You've been a ghost since she left, she said finally. Josh didn't look at her as he buttoned his shirt. I don't want to talk about this. Casey stepped closer, her voice rising. You said you wanted a life with me. That Maria was the past. Was it all just a distraction? Was I just a distraction? He turned slowly, his eyes cold. I didn't think she'd actually leave. I didn't expect her to disappear like none of it ever mattered. Casey's face tightened, a mix of rage and raw vulnerability. So you're punishing me because she had the strength to walk away? Stephen scoffed, grabbing his keys. I'm punishing myself. She stepped in front of the door, blocking him. Tell me the truth. If she walked through that door right now, would you go with her? His silence gave her the answer. Her voice cracked. You're never going to love me the way you loved her, are you? He didn't respond. Instead, he stepped around her and left the room without a word. Casey sat down on the edge of the bed, her heart pounding. The truth had finally surfaced, and it tasted bitter. She wasn't the reward. She was the consequence. And nothing she did was going to change that. Stephen returned to Aria's door, this time without the fire he brought the first time. Now, he looked smaller, unshaven, his clothes wrinkled, his shoulders hunched like a man aging under the weight of his own mistakes. Aria opened the door slowly, arms crossed over her chest. Didn't expect to see you again, she said flatly. I just need answers, he said, barely above a whisper. I know you know where she went. Aria studied him for a long moment, her gaze sharp and merciless. Then she turned around and walked back into the apartment, leaving the door open. Stephen entered cautiously. Please, he said. I can't sleep. I can't think. I don't even recognize myself anymore. Aria poured a glass of water, took a long sip, and finally replied. She sold the house with her own hands, quietly, legally, efficiently, and you didn't see it coming because she had to do it that way. Stephen collapsed into a chair, eyes wide. She really planned all this without me seeing it. Aria sat across from him. You didn't see a lot of things, Stephen. That's why she left. He dropped his head into his hands. I thought she was just upset. I didn't think she'd leave the country. Aria's voice softened, not with pity, but with truth. She didn't run. She left. There's a difference. He looked up, eyes hollow. Is she okay? Aria paused. Better than okay. She's healing. He nodded slowly, the words sinking in like stones. She used to tell me she felt invisible, he murmured. Aria stood. That's because you were always looking past her. She didn't offer comfort or forgiveness, she just opened the door. You got the truth you came for. Now live with it. Stephen stood in what used to be their bedroom, now stripped of softness, stripped of scent. He opened a bottle of whiskey and drank straight from it, sinking onto the edge of the bed. His phone buzzed again. He tossed it aside. Casey had started calling every day, asking questions he didn't have answers for. The more he drank, the clearer things became, and that clarity hurt more than the confusion ever had. He had destroyed something beautiful. For what? The fleeting thrill of attention. The illusion of freedom. He thought about apologizing again, writing a letter, even flying to Lisbon. But what could he say that she hadn't already heard in silence? Redemption wasn't his to claim. She owed him nothing. He stopped going to work. The company called twice, then gave up. His inbox filled with unread emails. Friends stopped checking in. Even his mother, once warm no matter what, had asked, What did you do, Stephen? And the shame in her voice dragged him deeper into isolation. The house became a museum of loss. Framed photos still hung on the walls, but they felt more like ghosts than memories. One night, he found himself talking out loud. You used to hum when you cooked, he whispered into the emptiness. You always smelled like vanilla and rose water. I miss the way you looked at me when you believed I was good. But the silence didn't grant absolution. Only the echo of a man unraveling in the ruins of his own choices. Maria walked the shoreline just after sunrise, her sandals brushing against the sand, the sky painted in soft shades of peach and lavender. The waves kissed her ankles, cold but grounding. With every breath, she felt a little more whole. Lisbon was quiet that morning, peaceful, the kind of peace that heals rather than haunts. She paused and looked out at the ocean, thinking not of Stephen, but of herself, of the girl she used to be and the woman she was becoming. I carried so much, she whispered to no one, so much that was never mine. Her voice didn't tremble. It was release. She crouched down and traced a line in the wet sand, letting the tide wash it away, just like her pain. Later, she sat with a small notebook at a cafe overlooking the harbor. This time, she didn't write about hurt. She wrote about the books she wanted to read, the things she hoped to learn, the kind of art she was thinking of trying. She smiled to herself for the first time in years. Her future was entirely her own. A couple walked by, laughing, holding hands. Maria didn't feel a sting watching them. Instead, she silently wished them well. In her heart, she no longer resented love. She just knew what she deserved now. And if it ever came back, it would have to meet her where she stood, without apologies, whole, and without shrinking to fit someone else's story. She looked up at the sun breaking through the clouds and whispered to herself, I survived. And that's enough for now. The package arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, wrapped in brown paper with no return address. Maria stood in the doorway of her apartment, unsure whether to bring it inside. Something about the handwriting slanted, tense, familiar, made her stomach twist. She placed it on her desk and left it untouched for hours, as if waiting for it to vanish on its own. But eventually, curiosity won. Inside was a single envelope, thick with folded pages. Her name was written neatly on the front. No, dear. No, my love. Just Maria. She opened it slowly, heart steady, and began to read. I have no excuse. I thought I had time. I thought you'd always be there, forgiving me one more time. I was wrong. You were never mine to lose. You've always belonged to yourself. Now I see it. Maria's eyes didn't well up. She kept reading, absorbing the remorse line by line. Stephen hadn't written to beg or blame, but to acknowledge. You left with dignity. You left quietly. That was your final kindness, and I'll never forget it. He recalled small memories, like the time she sewed a missing button on his shirt before he even noticed it was gone. How her laugh used to fill the car when they drive through the city late at night without a destination. I hope someone sees you now the way I never did. Fully. Clearly. As enough. Maria closed the letter gently, pressing her palm to the final page. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just breathed and placed the letter in a drawer. She owed nothing more. Closure never needed a reply. The morning air was crisp as Maria stepped onto her small balcony with a new journal in hand and a warm cup of tea beside her. The city below yawned awake, vendors setting up stalls, kids chasing pigeons, the river shimmering gold beneath the rising sun. She felt the warmth on her skin and tilted her head back, eyes closed. There was no rush. No plan she had to contort herself to meet. For the first time in years, her life belonged to her alone. She opened the journal to the first page and began to write, not for anyone else, but for herself. Today is mine, not because something big happened, but because I chose peace. Later that afternoon, she met Joshua at a park cafe. He smiled when he saw her, handing her a warm pastry. You look different, he said. She laughed softly, tearing off a piece of bread. That's because I am. They talked about work, weekend markets, maybe signing up for a cooking class together. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was steady, safe, something real. As they said goodbye, he paused and looked back. You're glowing, Maria. She smiled, lightly touching her collarbone, and replied, That's what happens when you stop carrying what was never yours. That night, she stood by her window, watching Lisbon shine. She didn't know if she would fall in love again, but now she knew that love would never cost her herself. And that was more than enough to begin again. Here's the Bible verse that frames this story, Proverbs 31 verse 25. She is clothed with strength and dignity, and she laughs without fear of the future. It reflects Maria's quiet resilience, her decision to leave not in revenge, but with grace, and her courage to walk toward an unknown future with faith and self-worth.